Hello, everyone. Welcome to MD Media's weekly show H panel. Today, the H panel will be dealing with the topic of war-torn Ethiopia, enabling elite and suffering civilians. This is the topic of the week we chose to discuss today at the panel. First off, we'll be starting with the first segment as usual, the highlight for each panelist. Today's panelists from different parts of the world, Yirga Galau from Australia, Skal Gabisa and Faisal Robler from the United States. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you back at the H panel desk today. Welcome.
Thank you for yes.
Great. Let's start with the topic with the highlight of the week. Yurga, why don't you start? It's 7 a.m. at your place, and we are in the late afternoon time now, 7 p.m. at this girl's place. Yurga, what's the highlight for you over the past week?
Thank you, Getachew. I think for me, it is the highlight was the celebration of Meskel. Meskel, as we know, is a big celebration in Ethiopia every year, especially by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church believers. But this year was quite different from previous years because we've seen an unfortunate intervention of the state or the government in how people express themselves. And in many places in the Amhara region, in particular, a region which is under state control, there were no Meskel celebrations in some cities and towns. And this time of festivity became a time of sorrow and suffering as there has been ongoing extrajudicial killings and torture and also jailing innocent civilians in many parts of the world, including a killing of priestess and Orthodox believers in Arusi zone, which traumatized a significant number of people in the country, and also the prohibition of the Ethiopian flag during the celebration, a flag which is very much politicized, which should not have been politicized at all, because it's been part of different ways of expressing oneself. But we see the ways in which government is interfering in how people, Ethiopians, celebrate their holidays using their own symbols and flags, and politicizing their phase, basically a phase which symbolizes the commencement of harvest season and a period where people pray for peace, stability, and unity. But this time has become an expression of sorrow and also reflects the ways in which the government in Ethiopia, the regime, wants to put its mark on the culture of our people. And that was a highlight for me.
Thank you, Yurga. Skal, what about you? What was the highlight for you?
The highlight for me is the ruling party's meeting in Adana that lasted about 11 days. I think it completed this week. I didn't know what this was about. It was billed as a training session for more than 2,000 government officials at various levels of responsibility. I thought that this was an emergency meeting or a regular meeting of the party, but it wasn't, because it was billed as a training meeting. One would expect at this time in Ethiopia, time of war, time of emergency, an emergency situation, that the ruling party, which bears all the responsibilities about what's happening in the country, would discuss and deliberate on the emergency situation, which the government itself has now made it a state of emergency, to try to find a way out of the conundrum, out of the incessant civil war that had gone on for the last 3 to 5 years. So the approach of the ruling party in the last 5 years has been to deploy the military to solve political problems. Clearly, this hasn't worked. We know that. And I thought this was a time for soul searching. This was a time for really having a discussion, a deliberation at the highest levels of government, putting all the minds that the Prosperity Party has together to come up with a workable solution, a solution that could address the political problem. Never expected that they would also continue to wage war in the second populous regional state in Ethiopia and not talk about it. The war in Amhara is not going well. What I'm observing is it's not really the ragtag Fano that do not have any unifying idea that are waging this resistance against the government. I think it is a well-managed, tactful, and strategic operation. What that tells me is that maybe some from the military, from the national military or the special forces of the Amhara have joined this resistance against the struggle, because they avoid engaging the military in cities and they attack it, they ambush and attack it, the military forces outside cities. That way it looks like they are gradually bleeding the military to death. So that really is a concern, or it should concern the ruling party, that there should be a time to discuss it. But that was not what happened. What happened is that they again deployed the federal military as if nothing happened. They were talking about other issues, that do not have any bearing on the emergency situation in the country, or dealing with the economy, or dealing with politics, or administration, or security. It seems the approach is see no evil, speak no evil, and hear no evil. That if you ignore a reality, a fact that the world is out there for the world to see, if you ignore it and deny that it is there, maybe it will go away. Maybe that is the Prosperity Party way. Now, second, even if we accept this was really a trailing for government officials, the idea that government ministers, who are actually appointed because of their technocratic skills, now require training on issues such as understanding money, time management, political narratives, digital leadership, artificial intelligence, attitudinal change, developing governing skills, servant leadership, skillful media operation, that this is what the government needs, what the officials need, is just beyond my understanding. But let's accept this was really a training. If it is not about the pressing issues that had engulfed the Ethiopian body politic and the entire country, what are these issues about? How are they related to resolving the issue? And thirdly, I expect any government, especially one that prides itself for being technologically savvy, to be free from error. But what you're showing right now, what you're showing the schedule of training, this is not done very well. It's full of errors. Something is lost in translation. But what I have heard is that all the officials that were receiving training, the highest officials in the country, did not know about what subject they were going to receive training on. It was entirely written by the Prime Minister. He is the one that failed to edit it, and you can look at it for the 11-day training summit in Adama. Here is what I wanted to say about all of this, that the refusal to learn about the failure of the recent past, of the last 5 years, the tone deafness about the bloodletting in Amhara and Oromia and other places in the country, and the decimation of technocratic efficiency has a name. When I was in graduate school, just beginning graduate school, we dealt with a number of states in Africa: the patrimonial state, the predatory state, kleptocratic states, and so on. What I did not know at that time is that there is also a kakistocracy, catastocratic state, which is a state run by the worst, least qualified, and the most unscrupulous citizens. That is the emerging type of state in Africa, and made its first emergence in Ethiopia. That's what stood out for me.
Thank you, Skel, for that. Faisal, I want also to start the topic of the day with you. But first, what was the highlight or what stood out for you over the past week?
Yeah, what stood out for me was a trip that I took to DC with a number of people from different national groups. The trip was organized by the Horn of Africa community based in San Diego, which also organized another conference in, I think, July. This time it was in Washington, D.C. We have had several engagements. One engagement was with the State Department, which is what this picture is, with Mike Hammer and his team. The other engagement was with the Capitol Hill. So I will start with this one, and then I will touch our engagement with the senators and some key congressional members. Mike Hammer, as you know, special envoy to the Horn of Africa, but particularly really envoy to Ethiopia, returned this time. And this time was a little bit different than our San Diego engagement in the sense that the Amara delegation fully participated this one as opposed to July when they walked out. So Tedros from the All Amara group, and then Masfin in the back from Ethiopia Political Action Group. Both of them were there. Both of them really actively participated. There was Afar, a Hereri community, and I'm not sure if a Sidama was there. We tried to reach to Sidama and Hadia, who couldn't really be there because of transportation issues and last minute clearance with the State Department for access. And I think this was a unified discussion. The discourse was very civil this time. There seemed to be, in my opinion, a sort of pulling back from the war narrative and more empathy towards each other. I was very impressed with the Tigray delegation to really understand the plight of the Amara leadership and where they are. So Mike, in a way, and I would be very open on this one, this time came back from Addis Ababa with less hope. And in my tweet, I said this was a challenging trip for Mike Hammer and his team. Indeed, it was. I think it looks like the conditions in Ethiopia are deteriorating. The leadership is not listening. And there seems to be a wall hit by the international community, particularly the United States and the EU, in terms of finding solution to the issues that both Yirga and Esquiel addressed. So that was the State Department. There is a significant worry, and underline that word, that Ethiopia is fragile and it could turn worst. That's what we understand from that. But I think we gave them recommendations. And as you could expect, the top recommendation was to do something about the Oromo and the Amara conflict. We don't want to watch the war in Amara to turn the same way it turned in Tigray. And I particularly said you watched the Tigray conflict and now you are watching the Amara, and America is not making a significant move. The same with the Oromo war. That's So we identified several tools. Whether they would listen to us or not, that's another thing. But several tools that America can probably move the needle towards the positive direction. The second engagement was with the congressional. This one, I think the Amara delegation decided to lobby on its own. So the Somali, the Oromo, and the Tigrania delegation lobbied together. We really hit key areas. We met with Ben Cardin, who is now the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Affairs. We met with Sarah Jacobs, and these are in person, which is really very rare to find that in Washington, D.C. Sarah Jacobs from San Diego, who is also the chairperson of the Africa Subcommittee of the US Congress, and several others. We addressed the main issues, the conflict is and the solution is, and even tried to see if one key Senate member could insert a language in the budget, a line item that may fund the ICRA, the International Human Rights investigation, which the UN may or may not fund. So this was a very successful mission. I think it shows that if all groups come together and speak with one voice when they visit corridors of power, things can change. But if they fight, which is what we heard from different angles, they don't know whom to trust or whom to listen to. So I think hopefully the Amara group can join this team and we can have one voice and see how we can bring some meaningful change to the situation. Thank you.
Great. Maybe I can stay with you on that, if I may. So the topic we chose is War-torn Ethiopia, enabling elite and suffering civilians. You have been writing, I think, for years, if not decades, on different actors in the political landscape in Ethiopia. And what we saw from Tigray, now Amhara, and Wallagga for so many years now, and so on, Somalia before. So the elite seems to be, according to some observers, immune to what is going on in terms of civilian suffering and unspeakable atrocities and so on. So get us, started in terms of the topic. The two groups, the elite on one hand and the civilians on the other, Faisal.
Yes. So I think I will start this from a simple area, which is also my profession, urban and regional planning. Last week, we heard Abiy and his government sort of beautifying Addis Ababa, beautification of the city. As you know, Addis Ababa is probably about 4+ million people, majority of them working class poor people. In the name of beautification of Addis Ababa, people are losing their churches, their mosques, their houses, their small businesses. These are really the bulk of the people. And on the other hand, you hear the government saying it wants to beautify the city for the consumption of the elite. That's literally creating two societies in a way. One that is very happy with glittery town and clean city, quote unquote, with some pocket parks that are not even accessible to the average Ethiopian citizen, and people who are not only being displaced, but losing the very, very business from which they get meager income to feed. See, I think in this autocratic nature, you have a large pool of, and I think Scale touched that very well. You have a large pool of cadres and technocrats whom you maintain. You have to either maintain them and supply them with sources of income so that they don't revolt against you, because these people are not with you based on ideology. And as you know, from Tigray, Mekelle, who is now part of the bigger picture of Ethiopian machine, all the way to the Somali region, where even as I was leaving Washington, somebody who is very close to the Somali president called me, used to be from the Amara community, and basically said when they used to meet with him, he used to make the Oromo elite his enemy to appease the Amara, and now he's doing the vice versa. So all these people are not loyal to Prime Minister Abiy, and he knows that. So one way he can really keep them around him is to let them loot the country and have free hand at the coffer, as opposed to people who are struggling for bread and butter, who are undermined. So I think corruption is at two levels. One is really, people stealing money, and that you see everywhere. But the other one is the structural one, and the one I'm talking is really the structural one, where the aspect of corruption is married to power sustenance and power maintaining. And Abiy at this point in time can only maintain power if he lets his technocrats and government employees loot the nation. You have 15 million people, according to them, from Kabale level all the way to the prime minister, who are in one party. They have to supply funding and everything for these people so that they can keep. So I think I wrote one article right when Abiy came to power, 2019, when I saw the administration that were being built in Jigjiga. I literally called, and not to offend anybody, but the reincarnation of the ghost of TPLF. I wasn't saying really TPLF reincarnated itself per se, but the system that most Ethiopians thought they got rid of it just got replaced with some names. And you see people like Shimelis Abdissa, Mustafa Umar, the Oromo, the Afar leader, the Amara leaders who are now being changed 6 times, just changing the face. But the corrupt system that we thought we got rid of it got reestablished. And I think, more than Haile Selassie era, what I see today is a different culture of two societies being created in Ethiopia, simply because at this time the consumption level of the petty bourgeoisie in our cities are higher than what they were in the 1970s. Billions of dollars. I was told the other day that one prominent Oromo leader son drives almost a car that costs about $100,000. None of us can dream to that. So the corruption level is beyond control. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Faisal, for that. Scale on the topic of civilians versus elite. So you have been also talking about how the prime minister and whoever is surrounding him never cared about the day-to-day and day in day out suffering of the civilians. So you can paint for us in terms of the picture from Wolega to Amhara to Tigray, what has been happening versus the response, if any, from the elite in Addis or in Bahar Dar or anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, the topic is about war-prone Ethiopia. It suggests that this country may not live without it, that the country has this tendency to live in the midst of war, as if that is really necessary. And if you look at even the recent history of the country, there's been very limited number of years when there was no war in the country. Keep in mind that Ethiopia participated in the Second World War. In fact, the Second World War basically started in Ethiopia in 1935. Even though in Europe it was in 1939, but it began in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia was basically, in effect, the origin of the Second World War, one could argue. Ethiopia also participated in other wars in support of United Nations efforts, like in Korea, in the Congo. There is really no time in the 1950s where the Ethiopian military was not engaged in some kind of conflict. Then from 1961, 62, all the way to 1991, there was civil war in the country. So Ethiopia is war-prone is probably an apt description. But in 1991, there was a political settlement. Whether people like it, disagree with it, reject it or not, there was a political settlement that emanated from 30 years of conflict. Because of the settlement, whether it was fully implemented or not, that the Constitution and the multinational federation, during those times, there was really no all-out war in the country. It is my view that this arrangement, this settlement, actually worked in obviating conflict. Some might argue that it postponed the conflict. I disagree with that, but the 27 years that the EPRDF was in power, with all the shortcomings in terms of protecting democratic rights and human rights, there was really no all-out conflict in the country. But in 2018, it began in 2018, for 5 years we are at war, devastating war. And this kind of war was really never seen in Ethiopia And of course, the Tigray War was one of the largest conflict in the world in terms of its impact on human lives. It is the elite war. My view about the war that's raging in Amhara, in Oromia, and earlier in Tigray, or the conflicts in other places in Ethiopia, they're always generated. They are engendered in the minds of Abiy Ahmed. I've said this many times. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I wholly believe that it happens in his head and then plays out. There is no reason that the Ethiopian government should go to war against the Amhara, the very political base that actually supports his vision of the country. There was no reason to go there. There are legitimate concerns in Amhara region that should be addressed, political problems, economic problems, and other problems that should be addressed politically. But there was no need for war. But if Abiy fears that there is something cooking there that is going to threaten his power, he would find a way. He would find a way to start a war. Now, after the war started, they have been trying to produce a narrative that says the rest of Ethiopia decided to obey his edict about dissolving the paramilitary group in the special forces. That in the Amhara region, though, the special forces refused to disarm and be integrated into the national military. So he found a reason. Abiy found a reason to go to war because the fear that he would probably lose power, which is real in his head. In his head, it's real. Even though the issue doesn't exist in reality, it's as real can be in his head, and that's what plays out everywhere else. You cannot rationally explain why he prefers war, why he makes true the idea that Ethiopia is a war-prone country. But the elite, on the other hand, let me piggyback on what Faisal said and stop. Addressing workers this week, a couple of days ago, workers were building his new palace, the $10 billion palace, the trillion birr palace in what he calls the Chaka project, addressing the workers there. He assembled them in Menelik's palace. He probably loves to feed people. Addressing them, he talked to them, among other things. So you do not understand what you're doing, only the next generation understands. In Ethiopia, people in Ethiopia do not understand the significance of the palace that we're building, the project of beautification in many cities that he is carrying out. He says people do not understand. The veritable leader understands, the people do not understand. And he told the workers, not that they don't understand, but the Lord actually sees them. God actually sees their labor and will eventually reward them for what they are doing. Now, here comes the metaphysics for why he is actually building parks and palaces everywhere. That is what goes into the elite mind of Abiy and his cronies. He can't help himself. It's psychological. Today or yesterday, he was in Jumma. What is he doing in Jumma? Another park. You would think, because of the criticism that he had received and the fact that the projects have floundered, that he would probably change course. He can't, because he can't help himself. He really cannot help himself unless he sees something that he had accomplished. He cannot sleep at night. He has to accomplish something. That's what is going on in Ethiopia. Everything emanates in his mind, and the conflict emanates from that. And then the satisfaction is not about the people. It's not about workers. It's not about the entire peoples of Ethiopia. It is about what looks beautiful to him. And in his mind, what we say, people don't understand, say, this is beautiful. Don't you see the flowers? It's beautiful. Why are you opposed to the beautiful things? It's because you don't know. That's the elite and the people.
Thank you, Scale, for that. Actually, you gave me something that I can start with Zirga. where in the same speech, the prime minister said, look at in the past, nobody remembers those who, planned and waged war or killed people. Only people remember those who built something. And he mentioned your hometown, Lalibela, as an example in that speech. And he said, decades from now, they would remember, don't worry now. They will remember me. And so that's literally what he said. So here again, the elite civilian, dichotomy, if we will, you see it playing in Amhara region now. We saw it playing in actually in the case of the Tigray war. We saw even those who were to voice, stop the war, anything, had to pay the price, right? Maybe we are not at that stage when it comes to the Amhara war, but still civilians are suffering. The elite is going, business as usual. What is your take?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear how our past is being reinvented and reused used for political purposes, like the way Lalibela was mentioned at a time when that area, Lalibela, is under military control and is endangered as a result of incessant heavy weapon firing around the churches. We had reported that the sound was shaking the ground, and people were worried because these shelters are living under unstable. These churches are living under unstable shelters, which are under repair, and the follow-up to maintain the churches, a project that was started long time ago, has not been finalized, and the churches are actually in grave danger. So if anyone cares for the legacy of Lalibela, I think they should pay attention to what is happening there in protecting that heritage. And just coming back to what you said, that's absolutely right. I agree. The Ethiopian elites do not have really a touch or they're not rooted in the lives of the people. I have written on this, looking at the political life of Ethiopia for the last 50 years. In my own understanding, is called native colonialism. It is a type of colonialism that uses the tools colonialists used in the past to exploit our own people. So that is what is happening. And I think there are two major ways in which the elite in Ethiopia, the political elite, and also the class, the privileged class in Ethiopia, abandoned the people and exploit the people. At the first part is the ways in which the majority are forgotten. And the forgotten majority are the poor Ethiopians whose livelihood depends on rural agriculture, pastoralists. Like 78 or above % of Ethiopians are rural farmers. They depend on smallholder agriculture. And when the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power, and a lot of people were really coming around him and supporting him, I at that time wrote an article about why Abiy may not succeed, because he's not listening to the rural majority. Throughout that period, the Ethiopian elites, not just the Prime Minister, the opposition political party groups, the journalists even, no one asked him about the rural people. No one asked him about what he or the country is thinking of in terms of supporting, in terms of helping the poor in rural areas, and also the urban poor, whose lives depend on the rural farmers who produce for subsistence. So, right from how we study in a school, the types of culture, the types of values that are being cultivated around cities, around the school, around spaces where people visualize the future as an extension, as an imitation of the West, rather than developing this indigenous culture that we have in Ethiopia. That is one major problem, which contributed for the alienation of the ruling classes, or of the educated class from the majority. So there is no a sense of vision to address the problems of the poor in Ethiopia, the farmers and also the urban poor, especially at a time when there is emerging ecological crisis, which would add to the violence and the war in the country. And the second one, I think, is a way also we try to settle the political problems that we have. And I might slightly disagree with Ezekiel's assessment about the settlement that's been reached through the Constitution in 1991. And my reason is very simple, because you see, when we come to 1991 in Ethiopia, when TPLF and other groups took power, the country, the majority of the people were more or less on the same status. The Amhara people, the Oromo people, the Tigray people, all people had suffered in the past. There was no a class, an ethnic class that has connections with the monarchical system, with the past. The 17 years of the Derg period had obliterated the entire ruling system that existed before it. So whether the past was a period where the Amharas were ruling or not, whether it were Tigrayans or Oromos, whether it was mixed, we may have our own differences, and that can be also settled by historians. But whether the past was an Amhara ruling elite class or the Tigray elite class, that discussion that took place in the 1960s among Ethiopian students movement, that thesis has been resolved throughout the 17 years of the Derg period, a period that killed the leaders of the monarchy, a period that confiscated their land. There is no power that came from the past that could allow us to build a system that addresses grievances in the present. But what the 1991 Constitution did was to invent Amhara as an ethnic enemy from where power can be taken, and to create a problem that really took us to the present, to where we are. So I think in the eyes of the systems that we created after that period, we invented an ethnic-based federal system, not on the basis of simply cultivating ethnic values, cultures, and so on, but also on the basis of creating animosity among and against one another. So I am in favor of any system that cultivates, supports diversity, language, culture. But the way the Ethiopian elites cultivated ethnic nations was by inventing one ethnic group, especially the Amhara, as a historical oppressor against whom they can take power. And that resulted in the emergence of these existing animosities. Now we see we are in a time where it is possible for one people as people could fight against another people, a war among people. At least that infrastructure is being created, and the elites can continue to manipulate ways by which Amharas could fight against Oromos or against the Tigrayans, unless the elite come together and try to stop the trend of making people enemies and try to solve this problem of demonizing one group against another. I think our problem could also be much worse than it is. And why Abiy, or the ruling class in Ethiopia, is continuing to do what they do is because people cannot really have a conversation about love, unity, and working together, because their language is very much kind of colonized by this language of animosity and nationalism, which creates enemy among or between them. I would really think that it is time to recognize that Oromos, Tigrayans, Amharas, all people in Ethiopia are suffering throughout all the regimes in the past. And we need to find a language that could bring us together and speak about our problems. The problem of the majority of Ethiopians, the 80% of the rural farmers, and the urban poor who are suffering from existing brutal systems, not from a monarchical or other regime that is long dead in the past.
Okay, thank you, Jurga, for that. One thing that is important to mention is how the role of the elite in terms of not playing its role in a positive role, and on the contrary, driving the people, the majority of the people, from crisis to crisis to crisis, is how the West and the foreign offices in Brussels, London, Washington treat human rights issues in Ethiopia as well. So this is a 2 days old article from the World Peace Foundation by Alex Doyle and Chidi Odinkalu, where they talked about Ethiopians' human rights do not matter. So they are mentioning in this brief article how, among other things, the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia would be disbanded soon, maybe in 3 days from now, if there is no last-minute action. And all this, even if the Europeans, the US State Department know much better than what they are acting on and so on. So this, for me, you can correct me if you can, like Faisal, that the elite is not paying attention and doing what it should do. Faisal.
Yeah, Getachew, when we talk about elite, what elite? I mean, isn't the same elite we are talking about that some portion of the elite were celebrating the death and demise and destruction of Tigray, its people, the rape of women in the hundreds and thousands, the blockade, the siege. We were a minority when we were calling Ethiopians to stand up for the people, not the TPLF, not the TDF, no FANO, but for the people. So this elite is not really, some generic term that applies to, blanketly. And I think, why would the West, why would the world stand for Ethiopian human rights when the very Ethiopians who are as much educated as the West leaders don't do that? I mean, I want to speak a layman's terminology without any academic coverage. Why? That's what they told us. They literally said in the corridor, what's wrong with you guys? That you shift from one side to another to kill each other. I'll just leave that. So whatever they write this, as much as some people agree or disagree, the shame is on the Ethiopians, not on the West. The West may not come to what we want as a group or that group wants, but just the very elite that's supposed to get solution is the problem in this, in terms of the elites, corruption and the role of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Dictators, I think Scale described it very well, but I will just embellish. Dictators have one unique attribute that others don't have. For instance, you rarely hear Biden or any elected president talking about small projects in Washington, D.C., or in New York, or in Los Angeles. Abiy is the planner, the engineer, the civil engineer, the beautification guru, the designer of the park and open space. There are trained people who know when it's appropriate, when it's not, how much it costs, how much we need to do, spend money at this particular juncture when 7 million Ethiopians are starving for food. So I think nothing that we need to study about the man in terms of his dictatorship and autocratic nature, except what he's doing in the urban milieu. And I think totally, urban issues gets priority, and when you hear urban issues, it's nothing but feeding the insatiable appetite of the elite at the expense of the rural area. Now, I differ with Irga on the issue of the Ethiopian issue of oppression being done by Amara or any other group during the Derg or by the Derg, and then system started. I think we need to look two things, in my opinion. First of all, the problem that we have all is that Ethiopia's state is a contested space. The history is contested. The institutional structure of the state is contested. Everything that we call Ethiopia is contested. For some, it might not. Because when we really talk about Ethiopia's history and oppression, are we talking about the 3000 history? Are we talking because the North oppressed each other among themselves, killed each other? In that era, Somali may not factor in. Are we talking about post-Menelik, in which case, yes, some ethnic groups played a prominent role and others get hurt so much so that they still carry the scars. There is no luxury as to why an Oromo today speaks Amarenya or Amharic, not because of their liking, but because of the vestiges of oppression that some people even lost identity. In the Black American literature, there's something called the critical asset. Even when oppression leaves, even when you remove institutional hurdles to certain groups, there are things that stay for generations that are socio-political, cultural issues. So I agree with the Derg has done with the land use issue and the land to the tenure issue. But I don't think the structural oppression that we have witnessed in the South and the East and the rest of Ethiopia just ended with the Derg. And how do we evaluate a 30-year oppression by TPLF, where it shared the power with Oromo and Amara political group vis-a-vis a long-term history? How do we really evaluate the fact that Somalis don't even factor in the quagmire of the three groups that are fighting among each other? I mean, there are a lot of issues that we cannot really conclude that the Derg finished one history and TPLF started another, and now Oromo is starting another. These are really a manifestations, in my opinion, of a long trend of oppression, of a structure in the state's nature that's a centralist state that draws its power not from one ethnic group, not from Amara, not from Oromo, not from Tigray, but from an elite. And that's where the elite word again comes, that an elite that uses the state. The personality and the background of the elite doesn't matter actually per se, but the system which they share is matters. Tok Menelik is state. Menelik was Amara, but he had Tigranya and Oromo, whether they were indentured slaves, captured soldiers, hired soldiers, or people who shared the same value with Menelik. This trio really came and descended onto our farms and our estates and our homes and really subjugated the people. So how you parcel and whether you say one oppression ended and another started, I'm having a little bit difficulty. What I do know is that I think the centralist state that has been established, that's oppressing the Amhara peasant, the Somali peasant, the Oromo peasant, the Tigranya peasant, is still in place. That's the one that we need to really destructure, decommission it, and come up with a new system. Unless we do that, I think it would be what now in the war narrative emerged as the so-called the Taranya time. Yesterday it was the Amara, after that was the Tigray, and now it's the Oromo. It's a valueless comparison, in my opinion. I think it's the central power whose houses are at Kilo that consists of the personalities that we know. There's a Tigray, there is a Somali today sitting at the pinnacle of the Prosperity Party, Adam Farah, who does not serve the Somali, who will not speak a word to save the Somali, as much as he may not speak for the Fano, resistance person or for the Oromo Ola person, but will speak for Abiy and the Aret Kilo power. So I think, I don't believe in the Taranya thing, but I think it's also wrong to attribute whatever Haile Selassie did to the Amara peasants or the Amara masses, who themselves revolted against him multiple times. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. We have 10 minutes to go, but we still can attach the final thoughts segment with the same question I was asking. So what is the implication, the ramification of the elites' inactive or passive role in all this miserable life for the majority of Ethiopians, Scale?
In earlier I talked about this continuous war in Ethiopia. One of the things that one acute observer of the Ethiopian political scene talked about is John Markakis talked about in his last book, is that the state itself, as the custodian of wealth and protector of privilege, is the locus of conflict. That the Ethiopian ethnic groups, the ethno-national groups, are contesting power and privilege because the state is the custodian of it. For now, a quarter century, or maybe about 30 years after that settlement, in which, and here is what the settlement is, you can say all kinds of things about the 1991 settlement, how it was implemented or not implemented. But the settlement was, on paper, the settlement was that the nations in Ethiopia must rule themselves and rule the federal government together. It was to minimize the state as an arena of conflict, contesting over that. That's the ultimate source. Now, over many state regimes, the way the elite have defended their monopoly over power and the distribution of privilege varies. They've always guarded their privilege, their access to resources, but the state power becomes the object of social conflict and an arena of conflicts because it is the only thing that exists. The private sector or the laws that protect private property, all of these are non-existent. Everything is owned by the state, and that is why, because it is the arena of conflict. Today it is being waged, and I wanted to differentiate that it's not being waged not simply to protect the power over the states, but to protect the power, the individualist power that one person wields. That's the difference from the Derg, from the EPRDF, and from the emperor and other states as well. The difference this time is that there are institutional controls of access to state power and privilege. It is one person. It's in a way unnecessary. It was unnecessary that this should have developed in Ethiopia. The path we traveled on the last 25 years were not fundamentally about the wrong direction. It is because of the unfulfilled promises of the political settlement that led to the change in government. Now, for this government, though, the idea that you can simply use brute force, sheer brute force, to quell dissent, to oppress the masses, the notion that you can bribe the elite, the military and the political elite and the business elite, that you can just bribe your way out of conflict, or the notion that pitting one group against another would perpetuate one person in power, that will come to an end. This is an old and tried means of protecting power. It will come to an end. It is coming to an end. The problem is what is going to be left. What is going to be left for the elite? Because this time when the collapse comes, it would be a violent collapse that we have never seen before, and there will be no arbiter of the conflict. There will be no one with preponderant power that will be able to overcome others in order to assert an enforced peace. That is the danger that these elite, the present elite in power in Arat Kilo, do not understand. They don't understand the limit of power. They don't understand the limits of exploitation. They don't understand the power of a disgruntled mass. That is the doing of the elite of this time. That there is really no governing philosophy. There is nothing to hold people together. So the collapse, which is inevitable, as it has been in the history of Ethiopia in the last 50, 60 years, this time there is nothing to prevent a catastrophic failure and the war of all against all.
Okay, thank you, Asgel, for that. Yurga, your final thoughts and any want to you to reflect on the topic.
Yeah, I think one thing we should really think is how to shift the notion of how to shift the center. Sometimes whom we call elites could be part of a group that perpetuates a problem. So what are the ways in which we can shift and look for people who are at the center of the problem, but also can generate solutions? And people who are suffering, people who are facing prosecution, these people have also solutions. And I think we need really to think of leaders from farmers, from urban poor, from young people who are engaged in their communities and really cultivate that type of voice and give them the needed recognition. I think that is very important. Our tradition is rich with people who have wisdom, and they have lived together for many years in the past. They were not always fighting against each other, and I think that is important. And that is why this notion of a struggle for existence and what they call khilwunna, which is very much related to the resistance in Amhara, seems to me is very important and a kind of unifying voice. It's kind of, I think for me, the way I understand it is, yes, we have political differences. We have a different way of approaching how to solve the problem, and that is healthy and well. But before we engage in politics that has a lot of contentions within it, let us first focus on survival. Let's try to avoid what Scale was earlier saying, this seemingly unavoidable fallout, disintegration, or calamity that's likely to happen. Let's start to focus on what is at stake, what is endangered, on saving lives, on helping people have shelter, on talking about the most basic rights people need in order to become political actors in their own country. And I think the notion of hiluna or existence against bilsigna or prosperity seems to offer a chance for people to bring the voice of the poor, the vulnerable, the dispossessed, all of these people's voice at the center of politics. Let's talk about that. By talking about the poor, we can resist the war against the poor. And once we find that type of speaking about pain, suffering, violence, and the people's language and desire, then that process will help us shape our next step politics in terms of what we can do to resolve the problem of the country. And that type of approach hopefully would help us to find a common voice for the future. Otherwise, we will have it's even difficult to imagine what is likely to happen if we continue in this path into the future.
Thank you, Yurga. Just 1 minute. You can take 1 minute each, Faisal and Asgel, for the final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I like what Yurga said. Center the people, the poor people, the rural, and even urban poor, to really understand what the people need from governance as well as from their day-to-day need. Ethiopians are at a position where they really look at the spectrum of the last four rulers: Haile Selassie, the Derg, the EPRDF, and the PP. At least from an intellectual point of view, the Haile Selassie era seems to have had less death when you aggregate. Nobody thought that we will be saying this in 2023, but less death, less bloodshed, less disruption. Of course, accommodation, cooptation, which are arts of politics in a way. But this Hiluna, the death of the family, the insecurity that surrounds the family, no matter who they are, Abiy's cousins could be today worried about their public and private safety. That's how bad it is. In terms of how to really structure a system of governance where people have the right to administer themselves, unfortunately, again, the Haile Selassie thing, in my opinion, was a small steps, but we cannot say one way or another whether what he has started with the Somalis and the Afar could have developed into a more sustainable situation. Most of you don't know that, but Somalis were the first people to have some sort of local administration. The first group in Ethiopia who have had standing national language program on Ethiopian radio were Somalis. That were just a flagship type program. I don't know if that could have developed into a more diversity and equity kind of thing, but he started that. Dergi came and suffocated, and then EPRDF started. I think Abiy is worse than what the Dergi did in the way that he is giving people's rights to really exercise. So I think we need sometimes to look at the little details of what others did in order to get and borrow what's good from one side and relegate the bad side and arrive at what my friend said, which is how can we really at the end of the day speak the same language that speaks to peace, equity, diversity, and the right to have public safety, which no one in Ethiopia today, whether you are labeled as oppressor Amara or oppressed Somali, or genocided Tigrenya, or atrocity subject of Oromo, there is nothing that you can say about safety today at the family level. And I think we need to bring that, and we need to lobby for that. And one way to do that is to join our voices and show that there is only one source. It's not even history today that's killing us. It is the very few people who occupy Eretz Kilo. I think with the history, we can intellectually debate. We can come closer to a center that we can buy time to even resolve the issue. But if you are not given time to even live and survive in any part of the country, there's no chance for us to solve the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Iskel?
Well, simply, shortly, there is nothing that the United States can do to solve Ethiopia's problem. Faisal, you were saying that the special envoy was disheartened by what he saw. Welcome to the club. We've been seeing and saying that forever. But there is nothing that they can do now. There is absolutely nothing they can do to help. I don't think the broad masses of Ethiopia, the farmers and the day laborers, are in a position to allow new ideas of how to govern Ethiopia to come from below. I don't think they can. I don't think the possibility is there. But in Ethiopia, there is an elite group. It's not amorphous. There is a political elite that wields political power that is connected to business elite, whose names you can discuss. The business elite in Addis Ababa and everywhere else, that is also connected and uses the religious elite for propaganda purposes, and that controls the media elite. These have created an elite group in the country, and those are the ones that are going to set the agenda. The US is not going to touch it. The conflagration from below is not on the horizon for me. I think Chidi and Alexa Deval are right. In Ethiopia, human rights doesn't matter. It's not going to matter. We know the problems. We have known it for 50 years. We have experimented with all kinds of approaches to create a state that is at peace with itself and with its neighbors. We have failed almost after 100 years, and there is really no idea to bring it together. It's a difficult problem. It's a dangerous interregnum. There is really little that even a new elite can do to change the course that Ethiopia is on.
Thank you, Skill, for that. Gentlemen, the hour is over. Thank you, as usual, for your insightful contribution today. Hope to see you again in yet another episode of the H Panel. Good night and good day, Yirga.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
We have been live online and we'll be broadcasting this under HBS, Horn Broadcasting Services, to the Horn of Africa. And stay tuned for another show in Tigrinya after maybe 20 minutes with Dr. Salomon Mazgabo. And we'll be also airing a very interesting interview that was done 83 years ago to the day. So 80 years ago, on October 1st, 1940, Albert Einstein was interviewed. This is a day when he took his final examination or test, if you will, to be American citizen. And in that interview on the same day, he highlighted why he chose to be an American, among other things about liberty and civil rights, all that. So it's a very interesting audio interview. We'll be playing that at 10 p.m. Eastern Time tonight to just commemorate what was the thought, what was the thinking for 83 years ago in terms of liberty, individual rights, all that from the very renowned scientist Albert Einstein. And tomorrow we'll have a special event. We'll be streaming at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. I just want to tell everyone that please tune in for that special event. We are not going to tell you now, it's a surprise, but at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, there will be a Tigray community special event. We'll be live streaming that at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That will be 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. No justice, no peace. Tigray community special event will be live streamed from UMD Media and other medias as well. Your host was Getachew Sefa. Good night from here. Bye.